Hi, everybody. Happy Thursday. 1 week, one more week in the bag, one more to go before Thanksgiving break. Catching up on homework, sleep, family time, hopefully a little bit of everything. So today we're going to continue our conversation about how we allocate resources, how we make projects happen related to rivers, and dig a little bit more into the possibility of conflict and collaboration and how we make things happen when it comes to river-related projects. And today we have Libby Collins from Colorado West Land Trust, and she is one of the go-to people, probably the go-to person in this area for open lands and easements and getting trails to connect our community and go through land, often private property. It's a lot of work, and she's going to give us some specific details about how that actually happens in the Grand Valley. Just a quick little review of where we're at. So we're talking about, we're on lecture 12.2, week 12, and we've got a reading. If you haven't read this yet, this is specifically about river access and private property. And we'll kind of circle back to this article after Libby talks with us. We have a worksheet, so you have a paper copy. There's also an electronic one online, and we're going to be filling this out today, and we'll talk about it after Libby talks to us. And then you'll upload that right here on this assignment on D2L, just for class credit. And then finally, by Sunday, please complete the quiz on the readings and documentary. I actually posted the questions ahead of time, so you just have to kind of get ready and review the work and be ready to answer those questions. There is a math problem at the end, and I'll talk about it at the end of class, about water and allocating water and doing a little conversion. I had to throw one in there. All right, so we're going to be talking today about the Riverfront Trail. I think, has anyone been on it, walked on it, biked on it? When you guys went down to Las Colonias, you were on the Riverfront Trail. And let me just zoom in real quick. Here's a map of trails in the city, in the Grand Valley. And so Las Colonias is down here, and there's a paved section. The projector's not on. Thank you so much. Yeah. I can see it fine, guys. What's going on? Thank you. How long was I going to go before I realized? There we go. So this is a map of trails in the Grand Valley. Obviously, there's a lot of little pieces here and there, right? Not everything connects. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is connectivity, which is really hard. The Riverfront Trail goes through this area in Las Colonias. And then I'm going to zoom out just a little bit and look at this map. And what this map shows us, this kind of yellow and brown dotted line, is the one Riverfront Trail that goes all the way down to the Loma boat launch and Fruta, connects to Fruta, and then makes its way all the way into the city. But as we kind of make our way east, there's some disconnection. So there's a disconnection here between Las Colonias and 29 Road. And there's a disconnection here, which is in the Clifton area to Palisade. So here's the Riverbend Park in Palisade, and there's a big gap there. And kind of hit some stone walls, a lot of private lands, a lot of folks not interested in a trail going through their property. And so that's what we're going to talk about. The challenge of connection and connectivity across a river corridor. So I'm going to hand it over to Libby, and we'll get your presentation going. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Joel, for having me. First, I want to ask, is anyone familiar with private land conservation or Colorado West Land Trust? Okay, so there's a little bit. So we're going to talk a lot about connectivity, collaboration, and sort of how to do that. But first, I want to give you a little bit of background about what private land conservation is about. And it provides the insight, some insight into the private landowner and what goes on in their head in terms of conserving their land and potentially making it accessible for public access. So So I've been working for Colorado West Land Trust for about 10 years. I do mostly public access projects. My project work has actually been on the Monument Corridor. Anyone been to Lunch Loop Trailhead? And the trails out there, ridden on that paved trail. So what I have done in the past is purchase property from private landowners along Monument Road, conserved it so that it would never be developed. I'll talk about what that conservation means here in a minute, and then transferred it to the city of Grand Junction. And then I've worked with all these partners, a lot of different partners, to put trails on the property, work with neighbors, figure out conflicting situations, get the paved trail on there, and also redevelop the Lunch Loop Trailhead, which used to be just sort of a dirt parking lot, and now it's got all kinds of amenities. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm coming from a really collaborative public access point of view. But first, what you have to understand is, how do you work with these private landowners? So our mission at Colorado West Land Trust is, as you can tell, we work with private landowners to enhance agricultural land and protect it, wildlife habitat and scenic lands. And our goal is to connect people to the land. So it's, and to protect the land from being subdivided and developed. So how do we do that? Well, we've been around for 40 years, so we've been around for quite a long time. So we do most of our work through something called the conservation easement, and that is the fundamental tool that you use when you're working with a private landowner. And I'm going to give you some examples here in a minute. But the other thing that we do is, like I just said, we acquire land for public access. So first, we're going to talk about what a conservation easement is. Has anyone heard that term before? Okay, not everyone supports conservation easements, and they can be conflicting in and of themselves. We can get into that in a sec. So here's a picture from our Fruitlands Forever initiative in Palisade. This is a critical area for conserving because it's prime agricultural land. We use the conservation easement to work with a private landowner. So conservation easement is a willing tool. It's a tool that landowners use, and they willingly give up the ability to develop or subdivide their land. Why would they do that? Could anyone answer? Why would you give up the ability to subdivide and sell off your land in a bunch of different pieces? Got any ideas? Yeah.
To ensure that, like, if they're farming.
And that is exactly why our land trust was started in the first place in Palisade, because a lot of that really prime farmland, I bet you don't know this, but Palisade has some of the most prime agricultural, particularly fruit growing land in the state of Colorado, in the West, as well as in the country. So there's some critical, it's maybe a couple of thousand acres that are really critical for fruit growing in Palisade. If some of that land is lost and developed, you lose that critical mass, and then the industry starts to decline. So landowners, agricultural growers in Palisade decided that they wanted to conserve their land to preserve the industry. There are a couple of other things that private land conservation can do. Has anyone ridden their bike out on the, maybe you guys have not done this, it's sort of an old person thing, but you know, you ride your bike out on the fruit loop, they call it, the fruit and wine byway thing in Palisade, done that? Well, it's a bike route, road cycling route, right? It's a scenic byway. So preserving the land along that scenic byway provides a lot of economic benefit for the Palisade area. It brings people to all of those local orchards. So having that land conserved, ensured that it's not going to get developed, is really critical for the Palisade community. Ouray, anyone been to Ouray? Okay, there's that beautiful valley floor between Ridgeway and Ouray. Farm and ranch land. So this is a picture of the Potter Ranch. We have conserved a number of ranches on that valley floor right there. Important because you're preserving the ranching community, and landowners feel that they want to maintain that ranching community in the Uray area. But it's also really critical wildlife habitat. If you have driven through that area, particularly in the winter, you will see herds of elk low down in their winter habitat on those private lands. What happens is that they're up here on the hillsides and up beyond in these mesas back here in the summer, and they need this private land to do their to live during the winter. There's also the Uncompahgre River starts and flows through here, so it's really critical wildlife habitat. This is really important for the recreation community as well. The wildlife needs to be on private land where they are not disturbed. And what we're finding out with so many people now getting into the backcountry and so much recreation going on, that private land, conserved private land, is serving a really critical need for wildlife habitat that can allow recreation to happen without further disturbance to wildlife habitat. So there are a lot of different reasons why you conserve a private land. Wildlife habitat is one, agricultural production is another. This property is along a scenic byway. The scenic byways in Colorado are a huge economic driver for tourism. They bring in a ton of revenue. The Scenic Byway Commission even makes funds available to organizations like myself to go out and work with landowners to conserve their land along scenic byways. So there are a lot of different reasons why we might conserve private land for actually public benefit, right? So who has put their boat in at the Loma boat launch and floated down Ruby Horse Thief? Anyone done that? Okay, this.
Hey, we had a trip.
Yay!
12 soon.
So this is a property you put in at Loma. You're just getting, into your boat, into rowing, and you look river right. And this is a conserved property right there. About 100 acres, privately owned. You would not have public access to it, right? You couldn't go park your boat on that private land and get out and camp or do anything. But it preserves, they're not building out that property. There's one house, and well, actually there are a couple of houses on there. Anytime you do a conservation easement, you can have a building envelope. So in that envelope, you can have some buildings, but the rest of it remains empty and vacant and open to wildlife or agricultural development. So that's what this property is. It's home to herons, bald eagles, all kinds of other wildlife habitat. So this is an example of you floating down the river and completely enjoying, you're out there in the wilderness because that land is conserved, even though it's privately owned. So SCORP, does anyone know what the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan is? You should know about this.
I know. For this class.
So SCORP is a plan created by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, but we have got to figure out across the West, but really in Colorado, is how do we do outdoor recreation and make sure that we are not just loving to death our natural resources like the wildlife habitat or rivers or, out on the trails. You can ride your bike or hike out on lunch loop trails. You got to stay on the trail, but so many people break off, make their own trail. That is devastating to the native plants and that habitat there. So the SCORP plan is really to start educating people all across the spectrum about how do we do this, and how do we collaborate? How do we partner? How do we understand and continue to benefit from the economic benefits, the public health benefits of outdoor recreation, but while preserving our really vital natural resources. So this is one of it's objective number 3. Private and public lands support outdoor recreation. So anything that we do moving forward across Colorado has got to be a mosaic of private land conservation and public lands. And all of the protection of habitat, trails. So we have to be talking to each other, all the user groups, the climbers, the mountain bikers, the hikers, the ATV users, all the groups have to be talking to each other. We have to be communicating with the federal agencies, and we have to be working and listening to the private landowners. Okay, this is, let me just try something, because something is missing on this map. There it is. Okay, so this is a map of conserved land that we have done in Palisade all the way to Clifton. And I'm bringing this up to point out how much conserved land we have in that area, but also a lot of it is right along the river corridor. Palisade, so this shading, this sort of red area, then yellow and then green. The reason that is there is because this area over by Palisade is really critical farmland. The reason it's critical farmland is, one, is the soils happen to be really good for particularly growing fruit growing and orchard growing, but also the canyon winds, which I'm sure maybe you guys have heard about, but they come down through the canyon. They're warmer winds. During the day, the air heats up on the rock canyons and keeps that air warm so that the temperatures right around Palisade are just a wee bit warmer than down valley. What that does is it prevents most often the fruit growing industry. It means that the fruit doesn't freeze. They don't experience as many frosts as you do moving down away from that really warm area. So it's a great area to conserve land. Why not? You know, why develop all of that really prime agricultural farmland when you can conserve it and it's really supporting the local economy? So this is a little bit of a dated map. We actually have a lot more land conserved up here on East Orchard Mesa. So as you flow down the river, this is these properties in red, all conserved, can't be subdivided, can't be sold for commercial development or any other residential development. And they all serve as really beautiful riparian habitat. So good to know, right? Because the rest of the land is also private. And that means that it could get subdivided and developed depending upon what the zoning is in the area. Does anyone have any questions about like what this conservation, private land conservation is about? Not yet. Okay.
Quick question.
Yeah.
So you're saying private landowners will have a concert or give a conservation easements or whatever, you know. What other incentives outside of the kindness of their heart and willingness to kind of keep their property in a state that it is, what other incentives do they have to do?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because a lot of these landowners are giving up a huge value when they give up the ability to subdivide and develop their land. They must be getting something in return. Well, they are. They're either getting a tax credit if they donate. So what happens is I have 100 acres and I'm going to donate the development rights for that. So a special appraisal is done. An appraiser comes in and figures out how much the land is worth today, and then how much, if you just took the development rights off of it, how much the land would be worth then. And the difference is the value of the development rights. That's what they would get a tax credit on if they were to donate. Sometimes, rarely, we, the land trust, will raise funds and actually purchase those development rights. There are other land trusts in Colorado that's all they do is they raise money and buy the development rights from cattle ranchers and things like that. But we don't, we mostly work with donated for a couple of different reasons. But anyway, so most of them get a tax credit. It's a significant tax credit. They can get couple $100,000 back. And often what these landowners do is reinvest it back into their land, either by expanding the real estate, you know, they buy another orchard, or they plant more trees, or they do something to increase their production. The other thing that they do is, this allows them to do is to hold, sometimes these landowners are land rich, cash poor. This gives them the ability to hold on to the land and pass it on to their family. So it's an incredible stabilizing factor for private families, private farmers and ranchers. Yeah, so what we're going to talk right now, we're going to shift now to the Riverfront Trail. So that map that Joel just showed you, there's this is the Clifton area, and the Riverfront Trail now goes right to this corner. So you can take this trail and you can ride back through Clifton, this Clifton Corn Lake, and continue towards Grand Junction until you hit that gap where you're kind of where Las Colonias is. But we're just talking, we feel pretty confident that that gap is going to get completed in the next couple of years. The real challenge now is, how do we get from Clifton all the way to Palisade? If all of this land is private, I'll tell you right now, these private landowners have already said that they don't want a trail across their property. Forgot to talk about that. So does a private landowner have the ability to do that? Say, no, sorry. Yeah, they do. Now, rarely Mesa County could come in and condemn the right, but Mesa County is not going to do that, and that's rarely done for this type of thing, and it's just a bad precedent. We need to, I don't know, our system is based on private property rights, and we need to respect those. We need to respect what private landowners do with their land. So that's the premise we're working from. So if they don't want public access on their land, we got to figure out something else. We got to go around. What we're going to talk about next now is connecting from Clifton to Palisades somehow along this riverfront. All this private land with already, we know landowners, some landowners are saying no to the trail. So why are we connecting from Clifton to Palisade? Does anyone know why we even have this as, like, why do we need to connect from Clifton to Palisade? So years ago, 30 years ago, One Riverfront used to be the Riverfront Commission and the Riverfront Foundation, but it's now called One Riverfront, created this vision that we're going to connect Fruta to, and now it's Loma, to Palisade with one concrete ribbon all the way down the river corridor. It's a great idea, right? So people can ride their bikes and go the whole distance or access different points. It's going to be a great recreational amenity that celebrates the Colorado River. Great Outdoors Colorado, about that time, came into existence. This was like back in 1996. And our Colorado Riverfront Trail was its like primary legacy project. Great Outdoors Colorado has donated, contributed.
It's over 10 million, right?
Yes, yeah, millions of dollars into this particular Riverfront Trail. Their legacy project, they want to see it connected. So One Riverfront wants to see it connected. Damn, how do we do it? So the vision is created, but not only when you put together a vision, like, okay, great vision, who's going to own it? Who's going to maintain it in the long run? This is a really critical piece. This is, like, I would say, one of the most important elements when you think about a project that you have to consider, because it's going to determine who your stakeholders are, who you're going to collaborate with, and what the longevity and, well, who's going to fund it? Like, if you don't have long-term maintenance and operations in your plan, then no one's going to fund your project. So this is really critical. This trail goes through all different entities. It goes through City of Fruta or Town of Fruta, City of Grand Junction, parts of Mesa County. Clifton is unincorporated. They have no Parks and Rec. There's no entity there that's going to do anything. Colorado Parks and Wildlife owns a bunch of this land, but you know, their capacity is limited. So who's going to take on this project? of connecting Clifton to Palisade. And then you have to do the project implementation. The other thing that is a really important part of this vision, besides connecting, is how do you access the trail, right? Parking, bathrooms. I can't even tell you what an important issue bathrooms are and restrooms, particularly now. Because Colorado Parks and Wildlife has some bathrooms along their trails. You now have to buy a park pass officially. It's not really enforced, but if you want to use the bathroom at Corn Lake when you're riding from Clifton all the way to Grand Junction, you're supposed to buy a parks pass. Okay, what is that, $7 to use the bathroom? And then what, you're going to get off your bike, you're going to like, where do I buy my park pass over here, and then you're going to go use the bathroom? It's crazy. So, but they have to do that because they don't have enough funding to support the operations and maintenance of their own facilities. So that's challenging. Shade structures along the way, we're a little bit challenged in terms of trees and natural shade. So people need shade, and then or benches, what are the amenities? What goes into this vision of connecting Clifton to Palisade? Really shouldn't just be a concrete ribbon. You've got to think about all these other pieces. So I'm gonna go, this is not the best map, I apologize. Yeah, so, but what I want you to see here, this is Clifton. So remember I just showed you this piece right here. This is where the trail ends in Clifton, along D&a-half Road. And the thought is that we would take the trail across this private property and then over to Clifton Water, up along the river and to Palisade. That was the original vision. For all the reasons I already mentioned, probably not going to go that route. So let's just talk about what's happening here. Right now, there's a Clifton project to develop this whole area, which is an ongoing gravel pit. And look, I want you to use this map to notice that, like, whenever you're looking at a project like the Riverfront, look at the map and look at all the different landowners. So there's a whole bunch of private landowners right along here, okay, where the trail goes. There's also public land. This is all owned by Mesa County and Clifton Sanitation and Clifton Water. So you've already got 4 stakeholders right there, just in this Clifton section, right? So Clifton Water, Clifton Sanitation, Mesa County, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and Corn Lake is over here. Oh, it's right over here. So Colorado Parks and Wildlife, they're also a stakeholder. What about all these people? Like, this is all neighborhood people. Do you care about them when you're creating a vision? Who are those people? What would you refer to them as? The residents? Maybe they're going to be the future users of the trail. Okay, so they live in all those neighborhoods. Does anyone know? Has anyone been to Clifton, lived in Clifton? So it's unincorporated. There's no town. There's no town government. There's no, how do you reach those people? Right? They're just, you would literally go knock on the doors. Well, we're lucky because I'm going to go straight over to the next slide. We're lucky because Mesa County Public Health is really involved in Clifton. So I'm not going to go knock on doors to talk to people about how they want to access the Riverfront Trail and where they need access, what do they need at the access points, where do they need the bathrooms. Like, I'm not going to go knock on doors. I'm going to call Mesa County Public Health and ask them, like, how do we reach these people? So as you're putting together a project, you have to look at who are all the stakeholders. You have to identify all the stakeholders. And so this is the first critical issue that you need to look at. And you have to think really creatively. So I don't live in Clifton. How do I go to those people? I'm an outsider. Why do they want to talk to me? Right? Okay, so you have the Clifton residents. I'm going to hopefully reach them through Mesa County Public Health Department because I know that Mesa County is really involved there. But let's see, what else? Who else do we have here? So who's going to own this paved trail from going from Clifton to Palisade?
Here's a question. Does Mesa County have a Parks and Rec department?
Have a what?
Parks and Rec
Oh.
department?
No. Well, let me qualify that. So Mesa County has something called an open space department. And this is what they say. The guy who owns, who directs that department, he's been there for a zillion years, knows his stuff. He's a great man. He's about to retire. But this is what he has said for years and for good reason. We don't do parks and open space. What? Like you're the open space of Mesa County? It's like, yeah, but we don't do parks, we don't do bathrooms, we don't do. So a little bit of a qualification there. They do the fairgrounds and they do Longs Park. That's kind of it. They have a very limited budget. And their budget goes to those two things. So you look at the Riverfront Trail, I mean, not only the construction of it, but like, let's just first talk about the access of it. Like, where do you park? Where are the bathrooms? Where are the facilities for people, right? Mesa County doesn't want to develop any of that stuff because that means they have to long-term maintain it and operate it. Paved trail, Riverfront Trail. They're going to be the ones because Clifton is unincorporated. Clifton has nothing to maintain anything long-term. Palisade, once you hit Palisade, Palisade Town would probably take on, that section of trail. But now you've got a conversation that needs to happen between Palisade and Mesa County. So this is sort of, right? Do you feel like your head is spinning? This is how I feel when I'm doing, like, putting stuff together, like, how are people working together here? And then who do you talk to first? And how do you bring people in? You've got the Riverfront Trail users, they're gonna have an opinion. Palisade landowners and residents, they're gonna have an opinion. Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And One Riverfront, the original visioners. Something that's kind of missing from here is Colorado Parks and Wildlife would fit in, but what about Fish and Wildlife? Are they interested in the Riverfront Trail and access and?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, when it comes to like habitat for birds, right? There's the
Right.
I always get it mixed up. The yellow-billed cuckoo.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you put a trail, if we're gonna put a paved trail in, it's gonna go through important critical bird habitat, you gotta bring in those folks. Okay, so how do people talk to each other? So like you've got agency, government people who, this is the challenge to collaboration. People are all siloed up and everyone has an agenda. They need to just get their work done. And now what we're asking them to do is to step out of that silo and have a conversation about collaborating in a project. And that's additional work. They just need to be documenting their yellowbird cuckoo habitat maps and doing their thing that is their 40-hour-a-week job, and they have plenty of it. And you introduce collaboration to them, and it's additional work. So it's really about building relationships with these people and inviting them to the table and trying to figure out how they benefit and how they can help a greater vision and have greater impact. A lot of people don't, collaboration is a lot of work, right? Have you come across that?
Well, I'll just give the example of who's done a team project for a class. Is it, do you feel like a team project's easier or harder than just doing it on your own? Why is that harder? You have to, people have to show up to meetings, you have to like get on the same page, you have to make a plan, right? And it's not all just in your head.
Right. You want to work in your own thing because you figure you have the vision, you know how it needs to go. And you bring that to the table. Anytime you're working with a group, you have to bring what you have in your head and how you think it should go. But then you have to listen to everyone else at the table. And you have to understand everyone else's agenda and where they're coming from. But you also have to step back and look at your own place and understand, like, what is the small piece that you bring? Like for me, the land trust, I could tell you how that Riverfront Trail needs to go. I know exactly how it needs to go. I know who should be involved. I know who could fund it. Like in my head, I know how it's going to go. But that's not my job. I am not in charge of all these people. I have to like stand back. I have to listen to what Parks and Wildlife. I have to listen to Mesa County's concerns. And then I have to see the picture and see like, how can I fit in and facilitate what this larger vision is? And really everyone needs to do that. You have to put your own personal agenda aside and you have to just figure out where you fit, what you add. That's the hardest piece. So they call this, I've heard it referred to as this part in project development as the grown zone, where you get everyone together. First, everyone's really excited, like, all right, we're gonna make this happen. This is so cool. And then you start getting into the nitty gritty and everyone's like, oh my God, this is so hard. Why are we not working together? And you have to kind of struggle and push and pull and figure out who needs to be part of a core group and who that let people step away. They realize they're not interested. And you just have to keep moving this forward. And Joel, you're doing that right now with the Colorado River Corridor Initiative. And you've moved past the growth zone, I think.
Yeah, we kind of get in and out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really, what is the motivation to collaboration? Why stay in it? Hopefully I've given you sort of a template of how to move a project and collaborative effort forward. It's hard. You're going to hit these obstacles regularly. You're going to come across people who have different opinions, and it's going to feel like they're throwing a grenade in the whole thing. But you persevere. But why do you persevere? Right? And that's what you have to just keep thinking, is that honestly, what I've learned in all of the collaborative work that I've done is that actually you want everyone to weigh in. And you want everyone to weigh in because that means they're buying in. Even if people don't totally agree with what the final outcome is, they're not going to try to launch a grenade into it. They're not going to go to the Mesa County Commissioner and try to stop it. That's really what you don't want. You want people to be like, all right, it's not exactly what I wanted, but okay. Or better, you really want people to be like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. So greater number of stakeholders actually is good. Just have to figure out how to work with them. You want your facilities, your project to meet the needs of many people, all users, to be as inclusive as possible. And what that does is it creates a stewardship ethic for the project, for the land, for wherever you're working, so that people don't want to vandalize it because they have played a role in creating it. It reduces crime. That's a statistic. People care and they want to support it. And also it's with a whole lot of people involved and the collaborative effort, and you can demonstrate community support. Your chances of funding, which we haven't even talked about, like you need funding, but your chances of funding are escalate when you can demonstrate widespread use and facility and support for the facilities. And then the other thing is that you have greater impact on the community. And I'm just gonna skip that and go to, what you do is you actually build common ground. You bring all of these different interests to the table and you rise up above your own personal siloed interests, and people come together and figure out a way to connect and make a project happen. And that is common ground, and it builds community. And I can't emphasize this enough. What happens when you build community for one project is that a whole bunch of other projects are going to spin off of that, because people have connected in ways they've never connected before. You have collaborative efforts amongst agencies and organizations that have never happened, and they now start to build on that and see other projects that can happen. And it's just like a domino effect for how that can build community and just have a great impact for so many people. So the last thing I would have to say about collaboration, that is just another reason to do it, is it's just really fun. It takes you out of the drudgery of being on a computer and just sort of checking your box for work, because you're meeting with people and you're enjoying the conversations and the relationships that you're building, and it just makes the work that you're doing come alive and just feel real. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts, or yeah?
Well, I'm from the front range, and every time I go back to school, I always notice that there's so much more development going on.
Yeah.
Especially with Adams Ranch and around that area. So can you kind of or creates like this sort of lands and isn't just continue.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a little bit tricky. There are land trusts and land conservation efforts going on across the range. They usually focus on large ranch conservation, and yeah, it's all kind of mostly about ranch lands, and those ranch lands to the east, you know, due east are the things getting developed. The infill areas, it's hard to conserve those. And the reason is because once land has already been designated by whatever municipality as, you know, zoned for high density residential development, and they've already brought services to that land, like, you know, all the utilities and things, it's really hard to take that politically. It's really hard to take that then out of development and conserve it. We run into this issue here. We work really hard in Mesa County not to, doesn't provide any real conservation value to be working to conserve land in dense neighborhoods like the Ridges or the Redlands. People want to conserve land up there. They call me all the time, like, hey, I've got 20 acres. Can I conserve that? No, because it's already been zoned for residential development. We could maybe work with that landowner to do that, but the public benefit isn't incredibly large. And City of Grand Junction has a hard time with that because they're counting on the revenue that's coming from that down the road, and Mesa County as well. So it's really challenging. Front Range is just like you almost have to get ahead of it. So yeah, I know. I used to live. It's just hard to see all that development go. Like, you know, it's just even driving by a meadow and seeing a bunch of cows in the field, like there's better than that. But yeah.
One thing that's happening that some municipalities and counties are trying to do is preserve this stream corridor, which is those fluvial hazard zones, right, the floodways, so that the development can happen high up on the ridges, or, you know, but then the valley bottom ideally is a space to allow floods and wildlife to move. That doesn't happen everywhere, but if you can get ahead of the suburbs and the subdivisions, that can be as expensive.
And that's a relatively new tool, right? Because we don't really offer that, but we should.
Yeah.
We've actually looked at that. Yeah. Mhm. Because if you can, if you can do that, then development can still happen, but like, and so is there public access allowed?
Oh, yeah, that's the, that would be.
That's the whole
idea.
point.
That would be the point, bike paths and passive uses and connects neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I have two questions. Yeah, so what zonings, allow like conservation easements to happen?
Right, that is actually, yeah, I totally forgot to mention that. So the reason we work with conservation easements is because we work with private landowners. That means we can avoid the whole zoning issue. We don't, so zoning, basically, if you're a private landowner, you have rights to do whatever you want with your property, and mostly, and the conservation easement fits into that. So if you have if it's your property, and even though it fits within an R4 density zoning, you can still conserve it because it's your property. So by working with private landowners, we're able to, like environmental organizations struggle with the political issues, right? We're able mostly to step out of the political, conflicts and so forth, and rise above all of that, creating that common ground, because we work with just individual private landowners, willing seller, willing buyer. I mean, it's and we avoid all of the regulations. So we really try hard to stay out of that. So does that answer your question? Zoning doesn't really, they can operate separately.
Are there ever like times that, adding in conservation easement adds like value to the property? Or is it often like one of those things that like buyers will just like throw a pile of their easements, and it kind of makes it harder to work with?
So a conservation easement, what do you mean by harder to work with? Oh, harder to manage your property.
Like harder to like, well, my ultimate question is, does it ever add value?
So officially, a conservation easement usually takes value away from the property. So if I own a property and it's worth $1 million, and then I take the development rights off of it, it's maybe only worth $500,000 now, because I've gotten rid of that. However, so that's generally how it works. And just as an aside, that often helps with like agriculture, because the cost of land is actually a barrier for a lot of people to get into agriculture. So for someone to buy a conserved property, it's often cheaper to do that. Now, having said that, there are times when the value of the property is higher because it's been conserved. But generally, the value, I mean, it's a different kind of a value, right? If it's bordering like BLM land or national forest land, and it's providing other values, yes, that is actual value might go up. But generally, because you've sold off that development right, and this shows up in your tax assessor's information, and it's an official IRS designation, you lower the value of your property.
But it's all kind of based on what, as an owner, you want for your property, right? So if the value is based on a future subdivision with 20 homes on it, housing, but that's not what you want, then you're not really losing value, it's just potential.
Right. And if you're a landowner, the Talbot's family, I'm just going to use them again too. Also the Colteris, people own Colteris, the Highs, they have benefited as well. I mean, like if you know that you're going to be in agriculture or fruit growing or ranching, properties up on Glade Park, we have, thousands of acres under conservation easement up there. It allows them to continue their business and their production, and they're going to hand it off to their kids anyway. So you don't make a decision to conserve your property unless you have consulted your next generation and your financial advisor, your estate planner. We never suggest that people go into this type of a decision lightly, that they weigh out their long-term scenario and they really make sure that this is the right move for them. Because it's in perpetuity, it's completely binding, it's very limited to, how you can change and amend. And so it's got to be the right tool for you.
Cool, thank you.
Well, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me through Joel, and yeah, good luck with collaboration. Oh, yeah.
So we have about 20 minutes, and I want to just go through this. I'll just stop the share. I just want to go through this worksheet with you all and kind of bring it a little bit bigger picture. And we can kind of stick on the topic of building a trail along the river, because that's something fundamental to this class and what we're talking about here. Access to a river, recreation along the river. Before we get into this, though, I wanted to note that what Libby was talking about often was just kind of conserving an entire property, like a parcel, someone's land. You can also conserve or have an easement for just a trail, a little corridor to cut across. And in the reading about river access, that's often what is the case. An easement or a corridor is granted. It's drawn on a map. Say they have 20 acres of land, but they only need 1 acre to go from this road or this parking lot to the river or to the trail, or for a trail to cut across their property. Then they can donate that easement or have that easement purchased from them. Or sometimes the city will actually negotiate. Okay, so we've got this property, you want to put an apartment complex. It's going on right now at the Eddy project, which is just east of Las Colonias, where that bridge is that goes over to Orchard Mesa. And the city negotiated with them and said, well, if you want to put this many apartments on here, we're going to ask for an easement for our trail across. And would you be willing to do that? And so there's a negotiation. And then ultimately the city's granted access to build that trail across that property. So when land comes up for rezoning, there's kind of a window to negotiate those easements and get access. So it doesn't have to be the whole property that goes into conservation easement. It can just be just a strip for that. And this happens for river access, for boating access. Is anyone a rock climber here? Have you been up in the, yeah. I climbed in college. Uinta Canyon, real world-class climbing of these metamorphic walls. A lot of it's private property in the valley bottom, and the Access Fund is a group that gets easements so that climbers can cross on a trail and go to the rock through the private property. So this plays out all over. The landowners don't use the rights to use their lands for whatever they want, but they're granting access through it. So another kind of easement. And the last example I'll give you to not beat this too much to death is there's an easement for kids to walk to school to Scenic Elementary. This is in the Redlands. And there's Redlands is the roads are kind of far apart, and there's a lot of neighborhoods that are not really connected except for that busy road, South Broadway. And there's some easements across people's private property that allow the kids to walk from one road to the next without having to go out to a busy road. And yeah, those are really important. So let's take a look at this spreadsheet or this little worksheet here and talk about who the stakeholders are. And so what we're going to do here is just do a little game. I didn't bring a ball, so we're going to point. So we're going to start with one person, give it a response, and then call out a friend, a neighbor, or someone across the room. If you don't know a name, just talk about the color of their hat or shirt or something like that. So let's start with Ryan. Give us a couple of stakeholders involved in the river corridor here.
The One Riverfront, the Colorado West Land Trust.
One Riverfront, I'm gonna do ORF, Colorado West Land Trust. These are kind of the people with a big picture vision, right? They kind of like, all right, we want to connect the trail, we're going to connect the community. These are Libby's kind of the wheeler and dealer going out and making things happen. How about kind of more on the ground, and let's point to someone and pass the buck here. All right.
To the town of Palisade.
One more.
And Clifton Land.
Clifton, we'll just say residents. Oh, yeah, you've got residents. The huge kind of dense development there near where the trail ends is a mobile home park. But you also have the kind of bigger landowners, right? The agricultural lands where we need access through their land, right? That those are kind of two different stakeholders. All right, Vince, you pass it on.
Basic County.
Mesa County. One thing I'll mention is Mesa County, they do a lot of things. It's a big area. Our property taxes are really low. We don't pay very high property taxes, so they have a small budget. And that's based on history, that's based on politics. We've been rural areas typically have low property taxes. We're becoming more of an urban area. But Mesa County, they don't have Parks and Rec, right? They manage the fairgrounds, but that's it. So they're, you know, I don't know. We're still trying to figure out Mesa County. Like, do they want to be a leader? Do they want to see this trail connect? It goes through their kind of unincorporated area that they manage, but they're not necessarily a booster kind of driving the conversation. Let's give another one. Yeah, the users, right? What do they want? You've got super users. I was at the Urban Trails Committee last night in Grand Junction, and so there's a super user there. He's in a wheelchair. He's got a hand-powered tricycle, and he's all over up and down. And he's talking about how we've got a ton more users on the trail. It's been hard. People are not paying attention. They got their dog on a 20-foot leash, and how do we manage all this? Think about El Jets when it comes online. You've got the cantina, you've got the connection to the river. There's going to be like a gear locker. There's going to be people camping, walking back and forth across the trail. What's that going to look like? So yeah, the users are important, and some of them are more passive and just kind of like, hey, this was nice. Some of them are visiting from out of state, and some of them are like, this is how I get to work. Let's think of, well, let's go back to Palisade. Palisade, do you think they want to connect to the Riverfront Trail? They really do. They really do. So I'm on the One Riverfront Commission, which is the kind of group that envisioned the trail and kind of made it happen in the first place. But we've kind of hit some roadblocks, and Palisade's sitting out there like, hey, like, we're out here dangling. We're not connected. We want to connect because people come to Palisade, they do the wine tours, maybe they go on rondos, what do you call it? Sip and flow, whatever. He's a name for it. Anyway, on one of his floating tours, but they're here for 3 days and they could go rent a bike and bike down to Junction or something like that and go see some other things. So Palisade wants to connect for their tourism and for their community. People could commute, right? You could not have to get on the highway and drive all the way down to Junction. You could hop on a bike and be there in 30 minutes, something like that. So that there's a lot of reasons, but they don't have a lot of options. One thing I'll point out to you all on this map. So here's Clifton. They get a little label, but they don't get an actual town. Here's Palisade. Yeah. Oh, the projector, thank you. Just, yeah. We're gonna do this real quick. Okay, just like see what's in my head. Okay. So here's Palisade. They've got a little trail in the Riverbend Park, right? Here's all those private properties that we're just never going to get across those unless Libby gets out there and starts banging some heads together, right? So look at this. We got a little trail and it goes, here's a road that crosses the canal. What's this? the Grand Valley Canal, it takes water out of the river right here. And this Grand Valley Canal brings water all the way into town. And it's actually the canal that you see when you go up around Patterson Road and stuff like that. That's the Grand Valley Canal. Grand Valley Irrigation Company. Does this look like a good spot for a trail? Kind of cuts across. It kind of cuts over through those properties, right? They actually have an easement through all these properties. I don't have a trail in the Grand Valley Irrigation Canal. I got a nice wide, 20-foot wide gravel road right there. Does anyone know? Yeah, so there's definitely that. So if this is not owned by the canal company, it's just an easement that they've been granted or took or whatever from the private property owner, then how do you have to put an easement on an easement, or you have to get in their easement because it's already private property, so that can get complicated. So from a legal perspective, it is a little complicated. Grand Valley Irrigation Canal, and I haven't talked to anyone about this. I just know from what people say is they don't want to do this. They don't want to. They are worried about liability, people falling in the canal. They don't want to play, and they've been approached over the years, and there's just some old guards that really just don't want to explore how to do this. But it's not impossible, right? Because we have a lot of examples of where it has happened. If we zoom into, here's the South Broadway Bridge. Here's the Audubon Trail. Has anyone been on this trail out to Connected Lakes? It's lovely, cottonwoods. This is the Redlands Power Canal, and we have a trail through private property and easements on the Redlands Power Canal. And this was developed in the 80s in a different era, but it's been done before, so it's not impossible. That would be a great route, but right now, just kind of from a political standpoint, it's also not on the table. So I'll throw that as another stakeholder. But they don't want to be a stakeholder right now. So let's see, Grand Valley Irrigation Company, GVIC. Okay, so now we got some stakeholders. Where were we, Josh? You want to pass it? What do the different stakeholders want from the rivers? We can kind of work our way down the list. Will you pass it on? Adrian. What do the different stakeholders want from rivers or riverfronts? Let's start with Palisade. We kind of talked about them a little bit. Yeah, great. Give us an example. Yeah. So say that one more time. Ownership. And what do the big landowners want out of this? Well, maybe they want to have a trail through their property. Maybe they don't. Maybe they just want to have their nice riverfront and not have a trail through their property, right? Or maybe they want to develop it. Maybe they want to turn it into a gravel mine or something like that. There's a lot of reasons that our bigger landowners may or may not want something from the river. They're like, we bought this property because it's riverfront. That's what we want. We just want to enjoy it. And in the reading, you'll if you haven't read it yet, it talks about that, where we've got conflicts on the Taylor River. This is north of Gunnison or whatever, outside of Gunnison. And the river goes through private property, and they don't want a bunch of rafters hooting and hollering while they're out there fishing, or maybe they have a ranch where people come to fish and the rafters are coming through and disturbing them. So there's different uses that people might want out of that. Did someone guide on a Taylor, or was it the Arkansas? I think that. Anyway, okay. All right, let's pass it on, Adrian. What does a different stakeholder want? I'll just let you tell me which one you want to talk about. Okay, so kind of maintaining their agricultural, we'll just say setting or something like that. What else does Palisade want from the river? Okay. And we already talked about this, but they want to connect too, right? They want to have that connection to the rest of the community so that they can have that flow of people and tourism draw. Imagine a tourist coming here and doing the Palisade plunge and biking all the way to Loma, right? Someone's going to do that eventually. That'd be pretty amazing. So landowners, we have, we'll just say private rights. All right, do you mind passing it on to someone else? We'll do a couple more of these.
The users
Okay. They might also, what else do they want? And Libby talked about it a lot. When you develop a trail, you also need what? Yeah. Access. So just like amenities, what are the things that make it work? Not just a trail, but a place to go to the bathroom, place to park, place to access it. If I get on this trail, am I going to be on it for the next 5 miles without an ability to get off of it or not? So connectivity to the community as well. All right, let's move on to the next one. And if you don't mind passing it to another person. Let's do our friend in the plaid. How's that sound? So the question now is, what are some factors that tend to encourage conflicts when people have conflicting interests? Okay. So I'll bring up conflict. So increased traffic, increased use. The more people, the more potential for conflict. We've got the dog walkers, we've got the bikers, we've got the private residents who now have all these people kind of going by through their community that maybe they weren't used to. Do you mind passing it? We'll do a couple more of these.
there's potential loss of money with easements.
All right. Loss of value or money. If you take an easement, then that's cutting down the potential value of that property in the future. This kind of came into play with the Eddy property, which is that property, like I said, just east of Las Colonias. And the city had an easement that went kind of not through the middle, but further away from the river. And they wanted to be able to put a condo or apartment complex right where that trail easement was. And this actually went to the ballot, and the citizens voted to say, do we want to move that easement or not? That was a little weird legal thing that for the reason that happened, but we ended up moving that easement closer to the river. I was against that because I don't want the trail right on the river, but that's how it went. But now we have they were able to move that and have more access to develop and basically put another apartment building on there. So that's value, right? Let's think of one more potential for conflict, if you don't mind passing it.
There's like straight up collaboration is really hard to do.
Yeah, collaboration is hard.
Working together on the same project.
Yeah, and just the reality, the grown zone that Libby was talking about, it takes time. I'm working on this effort right now to try to develop a unified vision for what the river corridor can be from a kind of a land use planning perspective. Because all the entities aren't working together. Palisade's got their own Parks and Rec plan. Fruta has their own Parks and Rec plan. You've got the federal agencies with their habitat interests. And they don't talk to each other, they're not necessarily working together to kind of benefit everyone's goals and objectives, because it's hard. That's kind of weird. It takes time, people aren't necessarily motivated to do it. And you might, when you come together, you're not necessarily gonna all have the same vision, same goals and desires. All right, let's do the last one. So if you don't mind passing it. What- Yeah, so collaborate, things that encourage collaboration.
It can create more funding.
All right, so incentives. What are the incentives? Well, we can get better, more funding. And why do you think that is? Why is when a funders grant, like GoCo, which gives grants for open space, if they see collaboration and a lot of stakeholders at the table, why would that result in a better grant application?
And bring in more people that are using our money that area.
When they see more people at the table, they know that the projects is probably going to have a better outcome, better impacts. It's not just Libby in a room saying you're going to preserve this property because of this reason, right? It's everyone's values are coming together. She doesn't do that, by the way. It's everyone's values coming together and creating the shared vision, so that when someone gives money, they're like, hey, this is going to have a really good impact, not just on one user group or one stakeholder. So by seeing incentives, what are the incentives for collaboration? Well, if I see a collaborative plan in place as a funder, then we can bring more money to the table, and that's a reality. So there's, so let's pass it. Let's do a couple more.
Then we get everyone weigh in.
Everyone weigh in. And ideally everyone is heard, right? But maybe it's challenging to get all the voices at the table. If I do a public meeting about river development in Clifton, who's going to show up? How do I get them to show up, right? The folks in Clifton, are they working 80 hours, 2 jobs, or 80 hours a week? Are they incentivized to come and participate in a public process? So this can be challenging, but by getting everyone to buy in, we have a more successful project. We'll do one more and then we'll call it. So pass that buck.
I said that collaboration can make long-term maintenance and operations easier.
That's a really great point, long-term maintenance. So as we build something, we make something happen, I don't know how to spell maintenance. Then if more people are working together and there's a plan in place, then it's not just falling on one person, not just Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and which is a really big issue because they have a bunch of property that the trail is going to go through, that new connection between Las Colonias and 29 Road. And they're like, who's going to care for this? Like, no one's going to pay us money to use this land. We're not going to charge a fee when you go through this property and then leave. So where do we get it's an increased burden of maintenance. So who's going to pick that up? Is it going to be Mesa County, City of Grand Junction? So we need to get everyone to the table to ensure the longevity of the project. All right, so take a picture of this or scan it, upload it on D2L, or if you typed it out, just save it as a Word document. Remember, D2L can't do .pages, so don't upload that file for Mac users. And we'll see you all on Tuesday. Remember, rough drafts are due next week on your project.
Thank you.
Thank you.